Ms. Bull, thanks so much for taking some time here for us. A lot of moving parts. It would appear, though, that Canada has been granted a brief reprieve of 30 days from the tariffs. Does this mean that we don't have to worry now?
Oh, no, I don't think so at all. I think it means we have some time to get our house in order, so to speak, and be prepared. And that means like strengthening opportunities here within Canada, looking at how we are going to be able to support workers and businesses should the tariffs come in 30 days. I think it just really gives us some time to, keep working together to look at how we're going to be able to respond.
How should we prepare for the next month or so here for a renewed tariff threat?
So I think there's a lot that we can be doing to look at how can we look for other opportunities for businesses, other markets, and a lot of that does have to do with removing interprovincial trade barriers, which we know provide actually a tariff on our businesses inside the borders. Also, conversations with markets outside and instead of the US, so in other countries, strengthening our potential markets with EU and from a perspective of supporting Indigenous business, how are we going to be able to do that? And then also really looking and understanding what the impacts might be, and particularly for Indigenous businesses, those sectors that could be hardest hit. So would that be oil and gas, forestry, agriculture, mining, where we know that Indigenous businesses are very active and Indigenous workers are very active. And also, and really importantly, that a lot of the businesses in those spaces are owned by communities. So what's the impact going to be on communities, and how are we, certain that supports that are going to be rolled out will support those communities and businesses, and that the government understands those unique needs.
When big things like this happen, when you look at like the pandemic, it's Indigenous people's businesses that are often hurt the most and impacted the most. What were you hearing from business leaders?
Yeah, so definitely, Indigenous business in a lot of ways is like every other business in Canada. And one, we have to dispel that myth that we're not businesses that export. We're not sophisticated businesses in sophisticated markets, because we are. And we have members who are exporting to the US, to European Union, who are looking at strategies to expand their markets as well. So from a perspective of how are we supporting business in Canada, that applies to Indigenous business also. But then us really looking at those sectors that are going to be hardest hit, and how can we ensure that those businesses are supported. And then particularly also businesses that a huge amount of their exports go to the US. So if I think about seafood as an example, where they have a large export portion to the US, how are we finding them alternative areas where they can participate in other markets and customers?
These tariff threats have exposed, how reliant Canada is on U.S. trade in goods. Does it also show a weakness that we're under-investing in Canadian businesses, especially Indigenous businesses?
I would say it has, but it's also exposed just how interconnected our trade is in general with the U.S. Some of the work on this council, for me to be there, I've learned a lot as well. And one of that, just as an example, is there's a certain part for Ford trucks that actually crosses the border 6 times, back and forth, originating in Mexico and then back and forth between Canada and the US before it's actually put in the truck and sold. And that is like interconnected trade that supports business everywhere. And I think if the tariffs do go in, American people are going to feel it as well. Definitely, I think there are regulatory barriers that we need to remove to support business, support entrepreneurs, and support scaling up. And we also need to really be supporting innovation and innovative businesses to ensure that businesses here in Canada want to stay and continue to do business in Canada. And access to capital remains to be a significant barrier for Indigenous businesses. I mean, the National Loan Guarantee Program will definitely help that in some ways for us to find equity positions in larger projects. But just understanding how programs need to be rolled out that support Indigenous business as well, and the unique needs of those. And I think that work needs to be done. And that's part of, a little bit different between now and COVID, is that we're ready and we're here at the table, able to influence those programs before they're designed.
Tabatha, we'll have to leave there, but appreciate you taking some time to share your expertise on this with us.
Thanks very much, Miigwech.